Hiring somebody to work for you is one of the most delicate things that you can actually do, and it's one of the most important things that you can learn to do. And it's something that you should be thinking about now. You might be just starting out, you might be in college, you might think to yourself that the idea of you hiring someone is absurd, but it'll come at you before you know it, especially if you're capable and driven and successful. You will need to hire people, and it pays to realize how to hire someone, what to pay attention to. I never really thought about the people that I was hiring when I was starting out, because I hired different people who would do services for me, lawyers, accountants, that sort of thing. And I never really considered what qualities I needed in such people. It was only when I started producing movies that I realized what I had to be paying attention to insofar as hiring people. When I hired people, of course, I paid attention to their resume, if they were actually qualified to do whatever task I needed them to do. But that actually is the least important element. Because what happens is, of course, is that you put up an ad for some position or other, and you're going to put like specific requirements that you're going to need, qualities or skills that the person will have to have, and you'll get tons of CVs with people who have those qualities and those abilities and those skills. That's the easy part. The harder part is their personality. One of the things that you're going to discover is that it is impossible to tell if someone is lazy. Lazy people. And I'm talking truly lazy, not those people who are sort of like goof off and then are catch-up kings and they make it on time. No, I'm talking about truly lazy people. Well, they are past masters at hiding their laziness. I remember hiring one guy in particular, a guy, let's call him Al. Let's call him Al. He was so brilliant in so many ways. He was so smart, and we could have these great conversations about different things when we were having lunch together and whatnot. He was so smart and clever and insightful and just on point. I mean, just really big brain, lots of IQ points, very educated, right? But whenever I would give him a task of whatever sort, somehow there was always a reason as to why it didn't get done. Yeah, I didn't quite understand it at first. I mean, because the things that I would give him to do, the assignments, they were things that I could do. And I thought to myself that this guy is smarter than me, because he was. He was, more IQ points than I had. And I was fine with that. It doesn't bother me at all. And on the contrary, if somebody's smarter than you should hire them. Don't worry about that. But he was smarter than me. And I gave him tasks that I assumed that I could have done. But he would never do them because there was always an explanation. There was always a reason for it. And I'd shrug and say, oh, well, okay, then this must be like harder than I anticipated. And, I'd set it aside or give him some other task or whatnot, sort of like, okay, well, this can't be done now because he said that there are these obstacles. And I would set that aside and give him some task. And then the same thing would sort of happen. It just wasn't possible because of X, Y, Z reasons. There was always a reason why something didn't get done, and it was always such a good reason. It took me a long time to realize that the guy was bullshitting me. He was very, very smooth about it, okay? And he played up to my ego and sort of like would play up to my sense of self and sort of like hide the fact. I mean, he was very manipulative. And I didn't realize it for the longest time. But then all of a sudden, I tend to have spreadsheets with progress reports on different things that I'm doing. And so one time, after like a couple of months or something, I had this guy working for me for maybe like 3 months. And after a couple of months, I just looked at all the tasks that I had assigned him, and I saw that they were all open. None of the tasks had been completed. And I was like, how did this happen? And so I started looking at each of the tasks, and on my own, I tried to do each of these tasks, and of course I could do them. And therefore, if he was smarter and better prepared in a lot of ways than I was, then how come he wasn't doing them rather? I had hired him to do these tasks, and yet he always had an explanation as to why they could not be done, and yet I was doing them. So what the hell was going on? Why did I need him? Lazy people are like that. Lazy people come up with an explanation. Like I said before, there's a difference between those guys who procrastinate, who put stuff off, and then at the last minute, they do it all. Those guys, they're actually different, okay? Those guys are nominally lazy, okay? But those guys, I don't have a problem with them because they just operate that way. They need the pressure to do the job, but they do it, okay? And this is the key thing. They'll never give you some bullshit explanation as to why it wasn't done. They'll just like, if it doesn't get done, they'll like shamefacedly say, yeah, I didn't do it because I was blowing it up because I was being an idiot, right? They're honest, is my point. The truly lazy, the destructively lazy, let's put it that way. That would be a better distinction. Those guys who are destructively lazy and come up with reasons, you gotta watch out for them. And whenever you hire anyone, that's the one thing you have to be on top of. Make sure that they're not lazy. Because at first, what happens is that these lazy guys, what do? In their first tasks, when they just start the relationship with you, they will be aces with whatever task you give them. It's going to be like the third or the fourth task, and every task after that, that's when nothing is going to happen. And that was my experience with this guy, Al, and this was my experience with another guy later called, let's call him Henry. Both were the same thing. Like their first tasks, they did them aces, and I got this impression that they were very capable. But after that, things started to slow down and finally stop. They just didn't produce. They were drawing a salary that I was paying for, but they weren't producing, okay? So you gotta notice that. You gotta notice that. You gotta notice when you hire somebody and they deliver their first projects like perfectly, that's actually a red flag, believe it or not. Because those guys later on, you gotta keep an eye on them. You got to keep an eye on those guys who seem so sparkly and great. And most importantly of all, when they come up with this perfect explanation as to why something didn't get done. That's the red flags that you should be aware of insofar as lazy people. But lazy people are the only people that you have to be careful about, okay? They are not a majority, a minority, but they are noticeable. And like I say, they tend to be guys who are really sparkly, who seem just fantastic. And you know how you can usually figure out that they're lazy? They've had a lot of jobs before you. Yeah. They're really sparkly and they're really fantastic, but their CV has like a lot of items on it, a lot of different positions in a relatively short period of time. They were at one position for like 8 months and another position at 6 months and another for like a year and 2 months. It's always like hopscotching from job to job and not really going up. That's different. A guy who's like consistently going up, he's like just 6 months in one job and then goes up a notch. He's just capable, right? The lazy guy, he's like, you know, he's at some job until they figure him out. And when they figure him out, they want him gone. And he realizes it and usually leaves one step ahead of him being fired. That's a typical thing with these lazy guys. But like I said, lazy guys, they're not the generality. They're like a minority. I would say like 15% of the people that you will come across are lazy this way. And you got to be careful. Now, once you've set aside those lazy people, what should you be focusing on when you hire someone? I once read something that Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook said that was really, really smart. And it's something that I had sort of unconsciously been doing, but he articulated in a way that I've used it ever since, which is the following. See, hire people that you would like to work for. It seems very simple, but it's actually very profound. Hire people that you would like to work for. You're talking to some guy, you're interviewing him for the position, and imagine yourself working for him, that you had to report for him. How do you think that relationship would be? And more likely than not, that will give you a really clear indication that you either want to hire him or definitely don't want to hire him. Because a lot of times you'll come across people who are very, very capable. And they smile at you and they seem great, but there's something about them that you realize that this guy would be an SOB to his underlings. And you have to think to yourself that, see, in any situation, in any position, somebody who has other people reporting to him, well, he's only going to be as good as the people below him. And if he treats his people like garbage, they're not going to give him their best work. And therefore, that employee, yeah, he might be smiling at you, but if he's like a dog to the people below him, if he's just like an asshole to them, right, that position is not going to be as effective. You got to find the guy that you would want to work for. Not the guy who's a pushover. Not the guy who's just like, you know, so easygoing that he's practically stoned. No. I'm talking about a guy that you admire and respect and would like to work for. Because that guy will bring out the best in his own people. And therefore, his position will be consistently delivering good results. And that's what you should be thinking. That's why you should always pay attention to that simple insight. Would you like to work for this guy? The other thing you want to be doing is hiring people who don't have a job. Yeah. See, there are a lot of theories on this, and in my own case, I've noticed that people who don't have a job are a little more desperate and they're a little more grateful. The problem is that they don't interview well. See, the guy who's got a job in hand, he's at a position right now, he's drawing a salary, he's got his responsibilities and his bosses and whatever, and he's fine where he is, and he's interviewing with you to see if he can get something better, yeah? Well, you know, he's going to be difficult. He's going to want more money, he's going to want less work, he's going to want more responsibility in the sense of like more power, but not necessarily the consequences of that more responsibility, i.e. he won't want to face the firing squad if things go tits up, to mix my metaphors. You see what I'm saying? And so a guy who already has a job is actually not the best candidate. But a guy who's recently lost his job, say a month or two, and he lost it because of no fault of his own, that's key. You find a guy who lost his job because maybe his firm went bankrupt or there were layoffs or whatever the reason, but so long as it's not his fault, that guy is going to be motivated. That guy is going to work like a dog. That guy is going to be your guy. I mean, if he's a guy that you could see yourself working for and enjoying yourself working for him, and he has lost his job recently, 2 months, maybe even 4 months, and he's motivated, well, what's going to happen is that he's going to come across in the interview a little bit desperate, or paradoxically, he'll come off like a little bit closed down because he's not going to want to seem too eager. Okay, that happens a lot. Guys who have been unemployed for a while, they recognize that because of their lack of employment for a while, they might get desperate, and so they try to shut themselves down to not give themselves away. It's like a poker player with a weak hand. You see what I'm saying? Yeah, he doesn't want to show that he has a weak hand, and so he tries to shut himself down. Well, those guys, they're going to be lousy interviewers. Okay, those interviews with those guys, they're going to go pretty badly, right? But you have to look a little bit beyond that. The guy who's got a good, steady job right now, he's not going to give a shit about you. He's only going to be looking at you like a mark, like a way to get more money. Whereas the guy who's been unemployed for a while and you hire him, he'll be your guy. He will stick with you through thick and thin, out of gratitude, out of loyalty. You'd be surprised. Finally, the last thing that you should pay attention to is those little first impression things. Those little first impression things that that might be positive or negative, but let yourself be guided by them. I'll give you a specific example. One time I interviewed this guy and I shook his hand in the interview and he had wet palms and I was like, ew, yuck. And the interview went okay, but that thing of like his wet palms, that stuck with me. And it's always a bad sign. It's a horrible sign. It's a sign of a guy who's weak, a guy who's just wrong, okay? And I know that a lot of people are going to say that, oh, it's just like sweaty palms, it doesn't mean anything. Yeah, sure, it doesn't mean anything, but the fact is, it means everything. A guy with sweaty palms, you don't want to be associated with him in any capacity whatsoever. I knew that at the time when I shook that guy's hand at that introductory meeting. I remember it like clear as day, and this happened like, 15 years ago, more than that. I knew that guy, I shouldn't hire him. But I allowed myself to be convinced, and he seemed on paper, he seemed all right. He gave me the right bullshit. He seemed okay, except for that thing of like the sweaty palms, and I was like, okay, fine, let's hire this fucker. Huh? And man, I regretted it. He was a disaster. He was a complete disaster. And I should have listened to that feeling. Listen to your feelings, to those little subliminal vibes that you get. And sometimes they latch onto something really stupid, okay? But you gotta focus on them. For good or ill, by the way. Sometimes you'll come across some guy who is just really like cool. Something will happen that might not be to his benefit or advantage or whatnot, and he'll just laugh it off and say, oh well, this kind of foolishness happens, and he'll just laugh it off, and you'll be like, man, that guy's cool. That's a good sign. See? Just like the sweaty palms is a bad sign, a guy who just laughs off some imperfection of himself is a very good sign, because it shows that the guy's cool, that the guy's calm and relaxed and he doesn't take himself too seriously. See? For good or ill, notice those little tells, those little things that you perceive and go with them. Allow yourself to go with them, because a lot of times your unconscious will be right more than your conscious mind will be. You see what I'm saying? Yeah, a lot of times those little tells tell a lot. And finally, perhaps most important of all, understand why you are hiring someone. Articulate it clearly to yourself. You'd be surprised that a lot of times people hire someone without having a clear notion of, number one, what are their responsibilities, and number two, what kind of personality you want for the position. See? A lot of times people will just fill up a slot just to fill up the slot. What you have to do is figure out, why are you hiring? What tasks do you want this person to do? Number one. And number two, what kind of personality do you need for the position? What kind of, do you need somebody who's conciliatory, who's a team builder, or do you need somebody who's a son of a bitch who's going to crack the whip? You got to figure that out beforehand, before you walk into the meeting. When you're looking through the CVs, you have to know that, and you have to write that down, articulate it, so that you know what to look for. You'd be surprised a lot of times, and it happened to me early. A lot of times you'd be like, oh, I just need to fill up the slot. It happened to me, interestingly enough, when I was looking for accountants back in 1996. I was looking for accountants to help me out. And I hired somebody just because, he was like worked at a brand name accounting firm, and he filled the slot. I figured, oh, this is the right guy, right? And I hired him, and he was just completely wrong for me in terms of personality, in terms of his work ethic, in terms of everything. He just filled a slot, but I wasn't thinking as to what kind of accountant I needed. What did I need him to do? Because it was more than just merely, filling out my tax forms, of course. It was like basically helping me to structure things. And he wasn't a guy who gave me options. He just sort of like limited me and just like say, do this, do this, do this, instead of explaining and showing me, you see? Because I was young, I was naive, I didn't know any better. I didn't realize that was what I was looking for. Don't follow for my mistake, okay? What you have to do is figure out, articulate clearly the tasks that you want the person to achieve and the personality that you need in that position relative to all the other people in your organization. Do you need a taskmaster? Do you need a team builder? Do you need somebody who's very conciliatory? What do you need? Once you've figured out what you need, then it'll become easy. Look, hiring somebody for a position is one of the most important things that you will do as an entrepreneur, as a man climbing the career ladder. It's a thing that you have to practice. And don't worry about it, because you're going to make mistakes. You're going to make lots of mistakes. It's perfectly normal. The important thing is to learn from your mistakes. When you hire somebody, and 6 months later it turns out that that was the wrong person, look back on your notes and look at what you were thinking about at the time to figure out where you made the mistake. Recognize that you will hire the wrong people at different points in your life. That's normal. But what you want to do is learn from those mistakes and start improving your average as soon as possible. Hope this helps.